Hello, hello. If you are looking for transforming L&D from isolated function to performance driver with Liberate Learning and Brandon Hall Group, you are in the right place. We're going to give folks a minute or two here to find their way in. As you're making your way in, if you can also locate that chat window for me in your Zoom control panel and let us know where you are joining us from today. We have a variety of time zones represented here today. So I am actually in the southeastern United States, and it is the end of the workday for me. And with my fellow panelists, we're covering the start of the day and the end of the day as well. Very good. I see India, Panama, Los Angeles, Hartford, Connecticut, Sydney, as I would expect. Some fellow UKers there for you, Charles.
Yeah, I can see that.
Very good. Excellent. So happy time zone. It's my new phrase now. Whatever time of day it is for you, I hope it's a happy time of day. Excellent. Ukraine, welcome, Anna. Great to have you join us. Very good. Well, you keep that chat window live and active as we go through. I'll explain a little bit more about how that's going to work as we go. Once again, this is Transforming L&D from Isolated Function to Performance Driver with Liberate Learning and Brandon Hall Group. My name is Matt Pittman. I am a principal analyst with Brandon Hall Group, and I am your host and facilitator for this session today. And I am pleased to be joined today on our panel by Mr. Charles Jennings and Mr. Craig Simon. Charles Jennings is a former business school professor and chief learning officer, recognized around the world as a leading thinker in innovative learning and performance approaches. Charles' career spans 5 decades and includes roles as head of the UK's National Center for Network-Based Learning, head of strategic technology at Dow Jones, chief learning officer at Reuters, and as a member of advisory boards for international learning, performance, and business bodies. Currently, he has the role of strategic learning consultant at Liberate Learning. Charles is a fellow of the Royal Society for Arts and a fellow of the Learning and Performance Institute. He is also a senior advisor at the European Foundation for Management Development and other bodies. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you very much, Matt. Welcome, everybody.
And Charles and I are joined today by Craig Simon, who is General Manager of Liberate Learning. He has extensive experience working across various education sectors in K through 12, higher ed, and enterprise education as well. He has developed a broad network of contacts by working with leading companies, including Apple, Sun, and PeopleSoft, with education authorities in the US, the UK, and Asia. He has presented at numerous conferences across Asia, the US, the UK, and Australia. Craig currently is general manager at Liberate Learning, leading their 80-plus strong multi-award winning team, renowned for their cutting-edge custom learning and performance solutions across the Asia-Pacific region. Craig, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here. And welcome
And
to everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Yes. And we would like to thank Liberate Learning, a part of the NPS group, for sponsoring today's webinar. Liberate Learning is a multi-award winning organizational performance and workplace learning solution provider with headquarters in Melbourne and locations across Australia. And as part of the NPS Limited Group, Liberate's specific expertise lies in delivering custom solutions in working in close partnership with over 150 plus corporate and public sectors, client partners. The Liberate Learning team is renowned and trusted for their design, development, and delivery of fit for purpose and value for money learning and performance solutions with measurable impact. We encourage you to learn more about them at their website. And if this is your first experience with a Brandon Hall Group webinar and are curious how we work with organizations, Brandon Hall Group empowers excellence across the HCM spectrum in a variety of ways, including our institute membership, our preferred provider program, our enterprise excellence certification and individual certification programs, as well as our likely best known excellence awards program that recognizes the best organizations that have deployed programs that have achieved measurable results in HR, learning, talent, and all other areas of HCM or human capital management. You can learn more about all of those opportunities at our website. At the heart of what we do at Brandon Hall Group is our research, and we currently have 4 studies that are open and available for input in the DEI sector, talent management, as well as leadership development, and our Learning Revolution study, where we're actually going to be debuting some data from that study during our time together today. This is meant to be an interactive experience. We will be going through some topics and questions and answers with our panel throughout the session. If you have questions, feel free to find the Q&A panel in your Zoom window and use that to submit those questions. We will address them as we go and reserve just a little bit of time towards the end of our session today to answer any further questions that we can. And by all means, please use that chat feature to talk amongst yourselves and add to the discussion. This is for you. And very quickly, I'll add that if you're here towards the end of the session, we will be offering a raffle with a discount registration to our annual research conference in the beginning of the year. So our next conference is coming up in January of 2025. Must be present to win, so stick around for that. And with that, I'm happy to introduce today's agenda. Thanks for indulging my housekeeping. Today, we really do want to focus on what are those skills and behaviors and approaches that will help you move your learning and development focus and function from being more of a order taker, as Charles will elaborate on, to a true strategic partner. And we're going to look at things like integrating into the business over isolation, learning in the flow of work, shifting from content focus to a context focus, and then talk about assessing learning maturity. And with that, we are going to jump right into this. And one of the reasons that we're starting with this topic of integration over isolation is the fact that as we have talked to organizations in our most recent study, what are the challenges that learning teams are running up against? What's interesting about this is there aren't a lot of new issues here. Short-term versus long-term priorities and strategies, cross-functional collaboration, resistance to change in the organization, resource management, technology issues, and managing through that change. And so, Charles and Craig, I know that you all have seen those same challenges come up year over year. And I don't have quite the years that Charles does, but I have a few decades under my belt as well. And so we know that these are challenges that continue to come up. So in this first topic, as we talk about how L&D should not be a silo function, but really an integral part of the organizational strategy, I'd like to start with you, Charles. So how does L&D currently contribute to the big picture of organizational value?
Well, thanks, Matt. I think that that data you just showed from Brandon Hall, that first column in the bar chart around tactical versus strategic is really critical, because evidence suggests that learning and development's contribution to organizational value is pretty variable at the best, I'd say. But generally, there's a significant gap between, I guess, what the current norm is and what the potential is in terms of adding business value. So first of all, currently, I think a lot of L&D work is focused on tactical issues, responding to the most urgent request and then being fixated on building some knowledge and skills without spending any real time understanding the strategic context. You know, what is this all about? Where does it fit into the big picture? For example, we're often asked to develop some training, and the first thing we should be doing when we get asked that question is say, that's fine, but let's understand what the root of the problem is and what are we being presented with? Because quite often training might not be the answer. You know, it's very often, in fact, generally, it's not, the organizational problems are not due to lack of knowledge or skills. Or usually the problem's due to some other factors like lack of guidance or lack of resources or poor leadership or all sorts of, I mean, a whole range of other things. So that's the first point, you know, making sure that we really focus in terms of bottoming out exactly what the root causes are. And I've found in my work, it's always best never to say no, but always say yes, but. And so if someone comes and says, we want you to do a training on sales skills or something, like, say yes, but let's work out what the root cause of the problem, what's your challenge, or what are the potentials for the opportunity. And secondarily, I think most learning solutions are suboptimal because we don't get to the root of that. And then what we do is we then go down into a sort of solving learning problems mindset and focus on behaviors, skills, knowledge. And we don't work more widely with the organization to deliver the best capabilities that we can for the organization. So I think that's the major challenges that we have. Now, you see examples of organizations which do very good performance consulting as part of their processes and so on. But very often training seems to be, you know, everything seems to be seen as a nail and training as a hammer. And that's very often where we end up. And maybe we don't even want to do that, but because, you know, our leaders and managers and team leaders, that's what they come expecting. I mean, all of us have been there. When I was chief learning officer, I had people coming to me, middle and senior managers, saying, Charles, I'd like your team to develop a training program on this, and it's got to be 3 days or 5 days or whatever it has to be, or it's got to be, you know, 6 e-learning modules. Well, actually, you know, you have to roll back from that and think, what is the root cause of this issue that this problem that we're dealing with? And then we don't have the issue of that same manager coming back next year and say, you know, you ran that training for us, we'd like to do it again because it hasn't done what we hoped it to do. So that's, for me, that's the key. They're the key issues that we're grappling with.
Right. And so from your perspective, what does the picture look like currently for L&D?
I think Charles is right. I think too often we're viewed as a tactical part of the business, where businesses will come to L&D with a solution in mind. As Charles said, they'll come and say, we want 5 e-learnings and 3 ILTs. I'd be surprised if a business went to a marketing manager and said, I want you to roll out 22 Facebook posts and 3 LinkedIn paid posts, and I want you to, or go to a sales manager and say, I want you to make sure, I'm going to measure you on how many outbound calls your sales team are doing, or how many meetings and how many proposals. They don't do that. They would go to marketing and say, we need 20% of our revenue needs to come from marketing qualified leads. We need to increase our engagement and our reach. They'd go to the sales manager and say, we need, you know, a pipeline of X dollars, and we need sales of Y dollars. So I think as an organization, we still sit, unfortunately, and again, to Charles' point, not in every organization, but many, we sit as a tactical arm, and we're there as just somebody to do something for the business rather than actually helping the business achieve their outcomes. And sometimes that's our fault. Sometimes we don't talk business language, and we don't understand business requirements. We don't, you know, I'd love to know, and I won't ask the people on the call, but I would strongly recommend that if you're in L&D, actually, if you're in any part of the business, you understand the metrics of your company. You understand, you know, what does your profit and loss statement look like? What are your key initiatives in the organization? Understand what your share price was like if you're in a listed company last year, and what the board are doing to change that share price. What are the key business drivers that you can have an impact on? Because I can guarantee you that one of the key business drivers won't be do X number of e-learnings or spend this much seat time in a classroom, but they're the things that will help us get to those points. So I I think at the moment we're too much of there's L&D and then there's the business, whereas we're part of the business and we should be
That's
talking
right.
like part of the business. We should be there and we should be involved in those conversations. We should have that knowledge about business drivers to be able to have the conversation with the C-level executive team and have a seat at the table, sit there and have business discussions rather than, content creation discussions.
Absolutely. And I know back in the day, I used to say regularly, learning is the work. The training is the work. It's part of the work, and managers would roll their eyes. So, Charles, what does it look like then, and what would it mean if we became more performance focused, business focused versus being learning focused?
Yeah, for me, this change in terms of mindset really to a performance mindset rather than a learning mindset is absolutely critical. And I noticed that that Nancy Krause in the chat just mentioned that the words you choose, make the message easier for the leaders to accept. Absolutely, because I think if you're focused on learning is a process and it's a continuous process. Performance is an output. So it's sort of flipping that from that thinking that learning is the key element of what we're doing, as opposed to what we're trying to do is improve organizational performance, team performance, and individual performance. And I think this difference between performance focus and learning focus is a real challenge, because currently mostly L&D functions are forced into an order taking operation rather than being a performance enablers. And to a certain extent, or to a great extent, we're responsible for that. We're responsible for being order takers because we simply don't challenge enough. And to Craig's point, we don't know enough about what our internal customers, what our stakeholders really want. If we can't understand what their specific needs are, maybe you're working in a big medical center or whatever. It's really about patient safety, patient care, patient, whatever. So if we don't carry out some sort of performance analysis and don't really get our heads around focusing on performance, we'll just take training requests and we'll serve up the training, and we'll find that the results that are delivered are just suboptimal because, as I said earlier, I think that the training request is sort of the first step. We should take that as the first step in a discovery process. And the challenge that we've got, and to Nancy's point, is that I think many leaders, managers, and learning professionals they see learning as schooling. So it's sort of then naturally to inhabit this learning mindset or this learning mindset world, and learning seen as the outcome. So that's why we end up, often being order takers. Now, sometimes we need to be order takers. If you're requested to run training on a compliance, if you're in a highly regulated industry and you've got national or industrial compliance requirements, you just have to do that stuff. You have to do it efficiently and as effectively as possible. And so always you'll be doing some order taking, but that's not really where the value is. And if I can just give an example, I did some work. Well, I've been working for a number of years with Citibank in both the US and also in Europe. And Citibank, about 7 or 8 years ago, decided to change their approach to learning and development and to move really from focusing absolutely on courses to being focusing on campaigns. So they initiated this big program, this big change program called #BeMore. And a lot of the meetings that I had as part of that big program that went on for it was a multi-year program. A lot of the work I did from my learning and performance perspective was working with the marketing department, working with the corporate communications professionals, working with their IT people, in some cases working with the finance people. So, we will always be order takers if we're sitting in that learning world. If we're not sitting in the problem-solving business solution world, we end up driving ourselves down a very, very narrow road. So for me, I've always been very passionate about moving into this performance mindset from the learning mindset.
Absolutely. And one really effective way to help support that is the measurement side. And Craig, let's talk a little bit about measurement and how do we what should we be measuring in L&D performance versus what we are often measuring?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it ties very neatly back into the last question. I think often we measure, we get asked to measure on how many courses, how many modules, how much utilization. You know, I always see people with these massive libraries of e-learning, and they look at how much got used, not what did it achieve or was it effective. And so I think we need to shift. I think what we measure now, unfortunately, is still the tactical. It's the how much, how long, you know, what number. We don't look at what the outcomes and what the performance measures should be. You know, I worked on a project with an insurance company many years ago, and they were great. They came to us and they said, "We've got this problem. We have a very lengthy call wait time when people are ringing in. Can you fix that for us?" And I loved it because they didn't say, "Can you build X, Y, and Z for us?" They said, "Can you fix it?" And we went, "Sure." So we took a baseline number, we measured what that call time was, we analyzed the problems, we understood that one of the core problems was the technology. It was actually taking a long time for those calls to come through. We sat and we watched somebody, what they call double jack. So we had a headset on and listened.
Yeah.
And someone would be sitting there waiting for a call. So the operator was actually waiting. So it wasn't as if they weren't busy. So one of the things we analyzed, it wasn't even a learning problem. It was simply a technology problem, something that was solved pretty quickly with just rerouting calls to the right people. Now, having said that, there was still an issue with the length of time in the script and the question and the answer. The operators not really understanding some of the language that was being used. So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, let's build a learning program that allows the operator to understand the questions more fully. Because when you can understand that question, you know, where are you located? What was the problem? You can actually respond far more efficiently. Now, we reduced down those call times by an average of 2 minutes. Now, in the insurance industry, that's a massive issue for them. So that was a really great project where they measured the right thing. Now, the client didn't ask how many e-learnings were going to be in there, or was it face-to-face, or was it context sensitive, or any of those questions. They just said, that's the problem we've got. Can you solve it? So I do think the measures that we are targeting should be shifting. And I just noticed a question. I can't remember. Oh, there was Steve. What does success look like, and how will you know? I love that question, and I think that's the imperative to ask the business. Not how many e-learnings do you want? Not what classes do you want me to do? I think to Charles' point, we will get the opportunity just to be order takers and build out regulatory type content or specific content. You may even get someone that's very focused because they know in their head they need to deliver X, Y, and Z. But I would still drive the question about why and what will good look like. You know, what will success be for you at the end? Because success won't be 90% of people completing the 45-minute e-learning course. I can guarantee that. That will be a driver to the success criteria, but we've got to understand that. And if we don't, then I think we're leaving ourselves fall short.
And Matt, can I just add one point? Yep. Lisa Rita in the chat has picked up that point as well about what does success look like. But what I'd say to Lisa's point, she says about what behaviors are we trying to change? Lisa, I would go further than that, because behavior is just part of it. Because performance equals behavior plus attainment. So it's not just changing behaviors. We need to look at how we change behaviors and how we make sure that attainment is reached. In other words, the performance is not just changing behaviors will not necessarily produce greater performance. And so we need to think more holistically than just the behaviors piece.
And I think that's a great point at which to start to transition now to talking about this idea of learning in the flow of work, and where we know that so much learning happens just in the course of doing our jobs. So Charles, I think you are going to walk us through some thought about that. So why don't you
sure
take
Matt.
us away?
So Yeah, this is a question that I've asked well over 100,000 people over the last 10 years. And I'm going to ask everyone now just to do this. If you'll just permit me to ask this. I want you to think back to one great learning experience that you feel improved your personal performance in life. Now, it could have been, when you were a child and a parent showed you how to ride a bicycle, or to throw a ball, or it could have been something else, or maybe learn to swim. Or it could have been, when you're at school or college and you suddenly got quadratic equations or calculus or some concept. Or it could have been, when you're working in a team that was very successful, or a really challenging project that you sat back and said, "Oof, I never want to do that again." Or it could have been sort of yesterday, when you were maybe, thinking about a project or some work you're doing and the light bulb went on. And what I want to ask you is not, and if you could put a response into the chat, is not what that experience was, but where did that great learning experience happen? Did it happen in a formal environment? So did it happen in a classroom or some sort of formal learning environment? Or did it happen while you were trying to complete a task or achieve a specific outcome? So if we can just stop, Matt, for just 30
Yep.
seconds.
We're actually going to open a poll.
Oh, great.
And let you guys respond in the Zoom poll to this question. Where did that learning happen for you? In the classroom or other structured environments, or while trying to complete a task or achieve a specific outcome? Yep. Okay, Salvato from the Brandon Hall Group team is running those polls. So thank you, Shay. And as soon as you're ready, as soon as it looks like we've got a good number, go ahead and let's put those results up on the screen. Now, you've been asking this question a long time, and there you go, about 88% while trying to complete the task.
Sure. And there's 2 points I make here. One is, often when I present this, I have a slide that has 80% on it, which I put up afterwards, because invariably it's around about that. So most of us appreciate that great learning experience happened while we were completing a task. Nancy makes a point that she wants to say both. Yeah, of course, we've all had great learning experiences. If we've had good professors or great teachers, of course, we've had good learning experiences, in a formal setting as well. But overwhelmingly, people, when they reflect back in terms of what that great learning experience was, it was learning as part of the task, part of working, or part of an activity. And in fact, Kenneth Arrow, who worked at Stanford University for many years, not only won the Nobel Prize for Economics, but 6 of his students have won Nobel Prizes for Economics. Kenneth Arrow, who's written a lot about learning and working, maintained that learning only occurred through activity. It doesn't occur in any other way. And maybe you'd like to just reflect on that for a time. But I think what it brings us to is this learning in the flow of work, in terms of how that how that really has an impact, in terms of if we can think about bringing learning and working together, then we're really going to move the dial quite a bit.
So when we start to think about that, let me put this question to you guys, and maybe I'll start with you, Craig. What are some of those real challenges and barriers in shifting from that sort of traditional training or schooling approach to more work integrated performance support, more learning in that flow of activity and work?
I think one of the biggest challenges, Matt, is we've created this position for ourselves as being a support agency or a support unit of the business, not part of the business. And so, unfortunately, back to I can't remember who it was in the chat that talked about the language you use. Just simply sometimes not talking about content and courses is the way to start. Talk about, how does this achieve the business outcome? How does this help you get to that key initiative A or B or C or whatever it was that might have been the target for the organization. And I think we need to shift that mindset again, not harking on it, but coming back to Charles's point about performance. We really need to use the language. We need to be putting measures in place that measure the performance. We need to, I think, stop talking about, someone joked about how many hours of content are we going to build, how many courses. We can't scale with the organization if we only talk about interactions and learning interventions. We can scale far more quickly as an organization, and obviously get more budget if we can show that the things that we're doing are achieving a business outcome, not just a learning outcome. And I think that mindset shift is a difficult one, because we traditionally haven't tried to move the business's mind about that. It's often some of the times I find that we have business problems with business leaders that don't understand learning. It's because they're expecting a X style output. The course must look like this, and it must have that, and it must have a look and feel that I want. Not I want you to produce this outcome for me. I want this performance to be improved in this way. And so those people are really prime targets to sort of say to them, stop. It doesn't really matter, if we don't have a nice pretty picture or an animation. Will that impact the outcome? And if we as learning professionals can show that it won't, then I think that's a really good spot to be. Someone, again, I think it might have been Medina, said that she uses a question. I really like this question. What if we didn't do training? What would happen if we didn't do any learning, or we didn't do any intervention? What would be your outcome? And it's obvious for them, nothing will change. And if nothing changes, then their measures aren't going to be met. And so then it's a really good way to segue into, okay, well, if we don't do anything, nothing changes. What is it that should change? And that really gets you at the heart of, that's what they want. They want that initiative to change, that thing to change. And you get that understanding then of where the business is sitting in relation to a requirement.
And Charles, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I mean, it was interesting that Nancy in the chat mentioned Joe Harless and job aids. And of course, we can talk about the work Joe Harless has done, and Gary Rumler and a number of other folks like this, and Gloria Geary, who've done fantastic work in this area. And yet that doesn't seem to have got into the DNA of learning professionals. So, Gary Rumler and Alan Brash, in their wonderful Improving Performance book, they found that 90% of performance gaps are caused by organizational barriers, not by knowledge deficits. And so, just going down that channel of saying, okay, we're going to fix these knowledge deficits, we're going to run a training program, and that'll fix it. The answer is, if the cause is something else, it's not. And another person who really knew what they're talking about was W. Edwards Deming, who was really one of the key people responsible for the recovery of Japan post-Second World War. And every 10 years, Deming took a step back, and he looked and he said, what percentage of organizational problems or opportunities are caused by and solvable by what he called the system, including managers and leaders, and what are solvable by the performer? And at the end of his career, he said, I reckon about 94% is solvable with fixing the system, and about 4% are solvable by fixing the performer. Now, that doesn't mean to say that our job in L&D isn't important, but it means that our job at L&D is more than just fixing the important. It's more than this knowledge deficit model, which simply doesn't work. And particularly in today's world, where we've got tools, emerging tools like AI and so on, but we've always had tools which will really help us in terms of back to Nancy's point about we've had job aids and those sorts of tools and performance support tools for years and years, and yet very rarely are they used to bring that learning close to the point of use, because that's where the real impact is. And there's a whole part of research going back more than 120 years showing that the closer to the point of use that learning occurs, if the the environment is as similar as possible to the working environment, that's where the real impact is.
Mhm. And I think that sets us up for really digging into how do we start to make this shift? How do we on this call who are trying to be as effective as we can be begin to make this shift beyond sort of that traditional training mindset and that traditional training approach? So Craig, how can we start creating that shift?
I think one of the first things that I would suggest is that you open up, if you're a listed company or a big company, open up the last AGM report, have a read of it, have a look at what worked the year before, what didn't work, have a look at key initiatives, have a look at the goals that the organization is targeting this year. I think read analysts' views of your organization, have conversations with your peers, not about the things you're doing, but a bit about what the business is trying to achieve. I think the first thing that I would suggest strongly is just immerse yourself in understanding the commercials of the organization. Whether you're a large organization, an SME, or a small organization, I think it's critical to understand, first and foremost. I think actually for anyone that works in an organization, to understand what makes the organization successful. I think that allows you then to make more conscious decisions about your day-to-day activity that's going to add impact and have value. So I think first of all, I think just it's about us. It's about us understanding. It's about us really getting to the heart of what makes us tick. You know, why are we successful, or why did we have a bad year last year? Was our quarter low? Why did our share price drop? Why did we have complaints to the authority or the regulatory body that manages us? You know, unfortunately, sometimes, you know, we get called in to support an initiative because there's a problem internally, and it's normally an outside regulatory body that has said you've got a problem, and unless you prove that you're addressing that problem, then you're in trouble or you're open to be fined in the future. And that's an extreme case, but it's a case that happens often. We shouldn't be in that position as a learning and development function. We should be understanding prior to that warning, if you like, what we could do to support our learners or our employees to not be in a position of breaking the law, you know, knowingly or unknowingly. So I think first of all, just understanding the business. I think that allows us to drive a different conversation. It also allows us then to come up with a solution that's really, really good, you know, rather than being told. You know, there was a comment that there we go. Kim said we're not told, others aren't told how to achieve their expertise. You know, that they're given the free rein. You know, own that space, have that conversation, own the understanding and the knowledge of the business. Then you have the right to say, don't tell me how to do my job. I'm going to give you the solution that I think solves that business initiative or that problem or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. And so Charles, from your perspective, how do we start to create more access to knowledge versus the schooling?
Yes, sure. Yeah. I think it's been mentioned earlier on, but, you know, we need to change our language for a start. You know, it's not L&D and the business. You know, we are part of whatever organization, whatever type of organization we work in. We are part of that organization. It's exactly the same way as you wouldn't talk about, you know, the IT department in the business, or you wouldn't talk about, you know, legal in the business. No, we are part of the organization. So we need to change the language there. And equally, we need to change language about, I think, one of the other major mindset changes is getting rid of that learner language. These people are not learners. We don't deal with learners. We deal with people who are working. We deal with experts. We deal with people who are working, and we're helping them develop capability and develop expertise. And I think that all ties into this old model that we had where knowledge was power. And actually, we've known for at least the last 30 years that access is power, not knowledge. I mean, we experience this every day. I'm sure all of us, you know, using technology all the day. Access is power. And actually the amount of knowledge we need to do our jobs that we need to keep in our head has been slowly decreasing, or actually quite rapidly decreasing over at least the last 40 years. Now, Bob Keeley and his team at Carnegie Mellon did some very interesting research, which started in the early 80s and went through to the beginning of this century, asking, the question they asked people, the subject was, how much of the knowledge, what percentage of the knowledge that you need in order to do your job do you need to store in your mind? And when they started out in the mid 80s, in fact, in 84, it was 3/4, 75%. By the time they'd done the same surveys in 2006, it was down to around about 8 to 10%. So if L&D is still thinking, if they want to create the shift, and we're still thinking about filling empty vessels with knowledge, rather than giving people the tools and the support in order to do their jobs better, we're really, barking up it's just not going to work. We're barking up the wrong tree. And the question I often ask is, how many, when I'm working with L&D teams, is how many of your L&D solutions provide either performance support or access to good practice, exemplary performers, access to information, rather than some sort of fixed body of content to be learned. And that gives you a bit of an idea about, I guess, the maturity in terms of this move from the learning mindset to the performance mindset. So I think that we just need to sort of think differently.
Now, what are other differences between the performance approach and the training approach, Craig?
Yeah, I think back to to Charles' point about schooling, I think we still have this mentality that that the problem can be solved by a course of some sort. Now, sometimes that's just because it's easier to do that, and it's less difficult to build that performance mindset and build different ways of engaging with the workers when they need the skill or the information at that point in time. And I fell into the trap, Charles, apologies. I did call them the learners earlier. And as soon as I did, I went, damn, yes, I got a slap on the wrist. Thank you. So I think, Matt, we sometimes fall into the easiest solution, and the easiest solution is just a course, a manual, a guide, an animation, an e-learning module. And I think that shift needs to be, is that the right thing? It might very well be the right thing for that point in time, but I would also then suggest that we use that thing, whatever it is, the learning intervention, in a way that becomes a performance support tool, so they can access it easily. I for many years have, to be honest, hated learning management systems. I just think they're one of the most difficult things for workers to get access to information, and having to go through a process of logging in, finding the course, finding the thing, to me, just it drives me insane. And I've never I've worked many years in this sector, and I can guarantee I'm one of the worst e-learners in the world. I think I can hand on heart say I've completed 3 complete e-learning modules in my life, and I can remember every one of those, and they were because I had to. But what I do a lot of is I use information quite a lot, and I like dropping in and grabbing bits of information where I need to get that, when I need to get it. Back to Charles' point, in the flow of work. I'm not a good person to sit there and go, right, I'm going to learn this for the next 30 minutes or 25 minutes. I get too distracted. Things get in my way. So I think that shift, Matt, needs to incorporate what we currently do, because otherwise we're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I think it's imperative that we have that access to those learning interventions in a different way. Take some of those assets that might have been built as a massive big SCORM package and repurpose them as just-in-time pieces of knowledge that you can grab when you need them, and make them accessible. I worked on a project a few years back where they were using Teams to deploy content out to it was a technology company, Microsoft Teams. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh my God, that sounds disastrous. But when I actually got into the application itself, I went, oh my God, this is so easy. It was a much cleaner way of me getting access to performance support tools when I needed them. So I think one of the other problems that we've got to sort of pull apart is access to that information, not just that information being there, but breaking down the old barriers of it must be, it's a course, it's a piece of knowledge, so it must sit in a learning management system, because, by the way, we've got to report how many people did it and how long they sat in it and whether they passed the certification or the test at the end. And again, unfortunately, sometimes regulatory decisions drive us down that path, but that shouldn't be how we view every piece of learning that we're going to participate in the organization.
What would you add to that?
Well, I think that, you know, answer your question around that, Matt, is I think I sound like a broken record, but I come back to this performance approach, this performance consulting approach. And, you know, it's my view that the training needs analysis has probably put our profession back 50 years, because, you know, what is the outcome of a training needs analysis process? Well, we all sort of know what it's going to be. It's going to be training. And performance consulting is a totally different way to understand what needs to happen for success, not just, you know, what do people need to know about. And there's a model that I've used, which is very helpful. I found very helpful. And if you just imagine 3 boxes in a line, on the left-hand side, you have the concept box, and that's what do people really need to know in order to do their job. And that's things like, you know, what's my job about? What's expected of me? How am I going to be managed? Who do I contact if I have a problem? Those sorts of things. Now, that's often best developed through some sort of structured process, you know, maybe through a really good onboarding program or something like that. And then the center box is the context piece, and that's around how does this all relate to my job, to my role, to the task that I have to carry out. So that's often much better. In terms of addressing that, once we move out of the sort of formal and we start to get into the workplace, bringing learning and working together. So we're using some maybe job aids, we're using performance support, we're using process guidance, all these sorts of things. And then on the right-hand side, you have task. So you have concept, context, task. And the task-based, you know, what are the task-based skills that I need? And how am I going to carry out this particular task? And the answer is, well, formal training is actually not very good to do that, because the period between learning it and using it is too long, and there's all the usual forgetting stuff. And so task related, you might have sort of contextual pop-ups, or you might have on-demand AI driven resources, or all sorts of things. So basically what it means that we need to do is we're moving from a content rich and experience poor type of approach to an experience rich and maybe a content lighter approach. So for me, that's really that's the journey we need to be on in order to really have an impact.
And in order to begin taking steps on that journey, it's important to know where you stand and how you're maturing. And so before we get too much deeper into that in our final kind of 7 minutes or so of conversation, we have a question for you, our audience, and it harkens back to the very beginning of our conversation. You know, how much of the work currently generated in your L&D team is generated by requests for training from your stakeholders? So is it less than 25% of your work, or is it less than 50%, or is it more than 50% of your work being generated by those requests for training that we've been talking about since the top of our time together? I personally predict we will be somewhere in the middle on this.
Sitting on the fence.
We could be higher. Oh, and see, I was proven wrong. More than 50%. Charles. So that really leads us to, what are the foundations of making this change? How do we begin to make this move?
Sure. I think that, this is about understanding this journey we're on, moving from simply being order taking. And we've talked earlier saying, sometimes order taking, we need to do it. That's what we need to do. But there are other approaches. And this model that's on the screen now is it's basically an L&D business model. I guess, you can look at it as a learning maturity model developed by a colleague of mine at the 70-20-10 Institute called Jos Arets, who's done a lot of work in this area. And if you look at this on the y-axis, you've got moving from operational to strategic. On the x-axis, you've got moving from sort of L&D HR focus into the business focus. And if I can just very quickly describe the model, we have the order taking on the left, which tends to be operational, not strategic, operational, and focus on sort of L&D and individuals and supporting individual development. When you move upwards, and most organizations are a little more mature than that, and they're what we call learning enablers. So maybe they have internal academies, maybe they have learning pathways, curricula, or whatever it happens to be, and they have a structure. They've developed pretty sophisticated structured learning solutions, but they're still sitting. So they're much more strategic in their approach and more aligned with business, but they're still sitting in this learning focused. So you could put across the top here on the left-hand side, the orange and yellow learning mindset. On the blue side, we're talking about the performance mindset. And then once you move into the performance mindset and you're producing solutions which are focused on all the things we've been talking about in terms of performance outputs, when you're producing solutions like that, you're in the performance enabler quadrant. And then when the whole L&D function is simply operating in a way that any other business function would operate, and everything you do is based on sound understanding of business strategy, sound co-creation with your stakeholders, and so on, then you're in the value creator. So this model isn't sort of each of these quadrants is not what's the word I want? Basically, you can sit, your organization might sit across all. It's unlikely. I don't think I've seen very few organizations who I would consider to be value creators, but all of us always have to do order taking. Most organizations have pretty sophisticated academies and learning pathways and job roles and all that sort of structure. A fewer organizations are really focused on performance outputs and do everything from a performance consulting point of view. And then they design their solutions, co-create their solutions with their stakeholders. And those solutions are not just a training or a learning solution, but might be a process improvement solution, or could be working with another bit of the organization to produce a solution. So it's quite a useful model, I found, when working with organizations, and when we work with organizations, just to understand where they're at in terms of their current maturity.
And so, Craig, for the learning leader that's listening to this conversation and feels themselves very much on the left-hand side of this model, how do they start the change?
Yeah, I think the key really is understanding where you are right now, because if you don't understand where you are, it's very hard to make that shift. I think putting a plan in place to move to that right, if you're looking at this, and to the top right in particular, is going to need some rethinking, not restructuring. I think most people in L&D have got the skills and the ability to do this. So I think point one, understand where you're at. Point two, put a plan in place to shift, change the language, change the things you say, understand the business. I think point three, tell the business you want to be in this part. Share with them the vision of your organization, because I think they're going to understand and accept that more than you trying to tell them, or them thinking that they've got to tell you how much e-learning to do. They don't want to do that. They don't know the answer half the time. So I think I'm a big fan of value propositions. I really, really like the focus of when you're doing anything, and for me, it's what is the problem to be solved by the client, i.e. the business? What are the things that I do right now And what are the things I do that can solve that problem for them? You know, that creates the value proposition, that creates the connection and the synergy. And it's not a difficult thing to think about. It's, I've got these things that I can do. They've got problems that they need solving. Some of the things I do will solve some of their problems. And that's it. It's really then creating that value by solving a problem with a thing that you've got or don't have, but you can build, to solve a business need. And I think sometimes, and we've talked a lot about strategy and understanding the business, and it's really clear to get a clear vision of where the company is heading, as well as you. And I don't want to scare people by sort of forcing them down a commercial route that they've got to understand everything. At its nutshell, you've got the opportunity to take what you've got and solve a problem for them. Share that with them. Doesn't really matter what the problem is. It might be solvable by you, it might not be. It might be solvable by a learning intervention, it might not be. You know, if I go back to the insurance company, the first major problem wasn't a learning problem, but they thought it was. It was simply a technology problem. You know, I think that value creation, you know, I like value propositions. Here's the statement that we're making that's going to solve your problem. And I think those value proposition statements really allow the business to understand the value you are bringing to the table. I think really just refocusing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we kind of wind up in our final minutes here, if there are any questions that you've been holding on to, looks like we got one from Becky. Okay, well, Becky's question isn't really topical, but it's a great question, which I will answer. If you've got other questions that you want Charles or Craig to weigh in on, now's the time to do that as we start to wrap up. So for Becky and everyone else, there will be a link to the recording of this session, along with a copy of the presentation deck that will be sent to all participants within the next day. So you will have all of that in your inbox within a day or so. And while we wait to see if there's other questions, Charles, what are the key things that we should be taking away from this conversation? It's been such a great one.
Well, I think they're on the screen here, Matt. You know, we've talked about L&D often existing in a silo as a separate from the rest of the organization and being an order taker. And we need to move out of that in order to really take those value creation opportunities and put them on the table. And so we have to have, and having worked as a chief learning officer for many years, when I was working in the corporate world, it sometimes requires very difficult conversations with people who, you know, we've all been to school, and so they get the schooling mindset. And some senior leader or manager comes along and says, "We want you to do this training, this schooling," and you say, as I said earlier, my response is always, "That sounds great, but let's have a conversation about how we can really add value here." So
and I'm gonna pause you there, Charles, because we did get I think a great question to wrap up on in our Q&A, which is, how can we help business leaders to recognize the value of L&D? How do you ask for a seat at the table when there is resistance? Which we could probably do an entire session on that question.
Yeah, Craig, I don't know whether you want to jump in there, but I've got some thoughts, but you jump in.
You go first, Charles. Yeah. And again, that is a full webinar.
Yeah. I've always felt that, you know, this complaint saying we haven't got a seat at the table, how do we get a seat at the table? And the answer is you often don't need a seat at the table. If you are demonstrating real value to your organization, you know, to Craig's example, or I have other examples, like I've worked with the Hilti organization, and you know, their metric they used was the time to productivity and payback. In other words, how long does it take between when they recruited someone and when that person started to earn money for the company, rather than paying for their recruitment and onboarding and so on. And if you can demonstrate that, and in that case with Hilti, we demonstrated some tens of millions of dollars of savings. You are then invited to the table. You're invited to, whenever there's an issue, you're invited there. So that's the way you earn it. You don't demand a seat at the table. You actually deliver the goods, show the value, the business value of your solutions, and you will get a seat at the table. And have adult conversations with your stakeholders. And that means sometimes, as I say, I can recall a number of times as a chief learning officer sitting on across a table from a senior manager saying, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. My team is not going to do that for you. That is not going to be successful. You tell me your problem. We are experts in terms of solving those people-based problems, or we will work with you to solve those problems." But sometimes it needs a pretty tough hide to be able to do that. You've got to be you've got to stand up to them, and sometimes walk away. I mean, I walked away from a huge tech development training program that they wanted to introduce when I was at Reuters, that they then went outside and paid $1.4 million for, and it had no impact at all. But I was then able to say, "I told you so." It wasn't good for the company, but I just didn't have I then didn't have the leverage to make that, to get that impact. But sometimes you have to be pretty damn tough-skinned.
Right. Any final thought, Craig, as we wrap up?
Yeah, no, just reiterate what Charles said. I think, you earn your seat. You earn your seat. You prove your point. You you understand the business more, and you show the value you bring.
Absolutely. Solve the problem, and they will bring more problems to you.
Yeah.
So, and with that, I want to thank our audience for joining us today. Shay, we're going to let you throw in the raffle winner here real quick, and we're going to wrap this thing up.
Yes, thank you, Matt, and thanks everyone for staying along this whole time. I am very excited to announce the lucky winner of our raffle. So congrats to Lisa Furby on winning today's prize, which is 50% off the 2025 HCM Excellence Conference. We will send you over some information shortly to celebrate your win.
Thank you again, Charles and Craig, for a great discussion. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us. May the rest of your day be even better than you imagined, and we'll see you next time. Have a good rest of your day, folks.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Craig.